I think we'll get going. It's 3 o'clock, so one more session, two more sessions, including this one before the party. So looking forward to that. I am. So this is the last of the feature enhancement section, and we're going to talk about some document conversions and word automation. And this really completes the functionality that we're going to talk about this week. So I guess most of you know who I am. I've been up a couple of times already this week. Ben Robb, I'm a 5-time MVP, speak broadly around development topics and records management and enterprise content management in general. And those are my contact details. So the requirement that we've got that we're trying to resolve in this session is around building out the ability to download an article as a Word document and also download that as a PDF file that people can take offline. So meeting the requirement is pretty straightforward because SharePoint has a lot of features available to us that we can really use. The first one we're going to use to generate the Word document is the Open XML SDK. That's a free SDK from MSDN, and that's something that you can install on your servers. In order to do the document conversion to PDF, we're going to use Word Automation Services, which is an out-of-the-box service application that gets deployed with the SharePoint Standard Edition. And then we'll talk a bit about some of the dev best practice that in the real world you might want to look at when you're using these technologies, because they can have some fairly interesting effects on your performance and your server farm. So OpenXML, it's pretty much anything with an X at the end of it in an Office document format. So anything above 2007 will automatically produce OpenXML documents. We're talking about Word, but you've got the same process for Excel, for PowerPoint, as you have for Word. And these documents are basically CAB files with all of the elements within that Word document or that Excel file bound up into that CAB file in XML. And the advantage that this format gives you over the old traditional binary formats from pre-2007 is that it's much easier to manipulate those documents using code. So in order to do that, Microsoft have released an SDK that builds on the system.io.packaging namespace and really provides a bunch of new functionality for manipulating Word documents and Excel files. Some of the decisions they made about the way in which you do things, the code that you have to write to make use of that, are less than intuitive unless you understand how Word documents are formatted. It's very different to how you'd expect from anyone coming from a web-based view of how to construct documents. But there's quite a lot of guidance out there online around how to use this. And specifically, I'd call out Eric White's blogs on this subject. He's written a whole series of blog posts on using OpenXML and how that relates to using that with SharePoint content. There's some great resources out there. So in order to meet our requirement, what we're really trying to do is build out our application, our document, using values from our article IDs, from our article list. So we want to take an article, we want to push that content from that article list item into a usable Word document that's been branded and so on. And we've really got three main options for how we do that. We could, if we really wanted to, start with a completely empty class and manage code to build up that document from scratch. And I'm going to show you what that code looks like. And unlike Victor's XML, I'm not going to actually walk through every line. unless I'm running short. We'll see. You can also just build up your document as blocks of XML. Right? So if you really want to write that much XML, I know you guys are SharePoint developers, so that might be appealing. But yeah, again, there's a lot of XML, and I'm going to show some of that XML that you'd need to write in order to do that. And then the final way of doing that is by taking an existing document and modifying that in memory and using that as a basis, as a template for how you develop your solution going forward. So I'm just going to do a quick demo of a part of the SDK which can help you do all three of these approaches. And we'll see by the end of it that option 3 of that previous list is probably where you want to go. So we have, this is a tool that comes alongside the SDK that redistributable allows. And it provides, it's the productivity tool for Office XML, OpenXML. And what it gives you is, whatever. They're the same, right? It's a bit like ODF. Anyway. Yeah. So what you can do with this productivity tool is explore a document, a Word document, and use reflection to generate you some code for doing that. And so I've just loaded up a standard Word document. It's only a single page. It's not very big. It doesn't have any magic in it. It's just a really simple Hello World type document. And we can browse through the namespaces and find different paragraphs and statements and stuff. You can see already that there's a lot of stuff in here, a lot of XML that's going to be generated. And so if I actually just reflect that code and have a look at what we'd have to do in order to build this from scratch, this is the code you'd need to write in order to write that Word document from scratch. And I'm just going to, so this isn't a great medium to look at this. I'm going to just say new file, C#. Did that actually copy? Copy. There we go. No, that's sufficient code, right? It's maintainable. It's like 4,000. So I'm going to step through every. I'm going to step through every line, and so. And so this actually does have some images in it, and it's got a bunch of stuff, right? I'm just going to scroll through it so you can see vaguely what's going on. Yeah. Anyway, so it's not great like this. You generally don't want to be starting from scratch and trying to recreate a Word document as is. So what about the XML? Well, we can have a look at the XML that a particular part of the document would need, again, in this tool. And you can see that it's almost, look at the size of this. It's almost as verbose as the code I just showed. It's probably slightly more verbose. So again, you probably don't want to be starting from an XML file and creating that, building that up from scratch. It's just, it's not a great thing. What it is really useful for, though, this tool, is being able to create something in a Word document and saying, well, what code would I have to write in order to achieve this in my solution? So I can go right down to a single paragraph, for example, and see that actually this is a heading, summary. That's a manageable chunk of XML that I could use in my solution. And similarly, the generate paragraph, there's a bunch of stuff that I could parameterize this. I could say, well, I'm going to send in a parameter for that summary. It's a manageable block of code. So it's a really useful tool for being able to really understand what code is required in order to achieve a certain thing. Now, paragraphs are easy. Some of the more complex things like content controls and so on, that you wouldn't guess, or even reading the SDK documentation, you're not going to really understand how to do that. Okay, so use this productivity tool to reverse engineer documents. Don't treat it as production ready. It really isn't. It's not going to be efficient. It's not going to be maintainable. So that's what we're left with, right? We're going to take an existing document and we're going to modify it in memory. If you want to go and get the SDK, there's an area in MSDN with that very memorable URL. And similarly on the download site there. Yeah. Just do a Google for the OpenXML SDK and you'll find them. Sorry? Or even Bing it. Well, whatever. Okay, so we're going to use a template document, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a standard docx file. You want to use a docx file as your base, not .x, because if you remember what we're doing, we're not creating a new document from a template in Word terms. What we're doing is we're reading in an existing document, making some changes to that, and then saving that somewhere else. So in order to do that and to use the power of Word to put content into that document easily, I would always use content controls, and they're pretty straightforward to implement. And I'll just do this live. So standard Word file, which I've just opened. And so in order to embed, I can do hello world. I can do all I can make this document look exactly how I want it to look. But in order to add a content control that I can then find in my code later and replace with some text from my article item, what I'm going to do is enable the developer options in Word. Customize ribbon. There we go. So just need to tick that box and click OK, and we're good. So once we're in there, we can see that we've got the developer toolbar is now available to us. And it's really this area here, the controls that we're going to use. Now, once we have embedded some controls, we could use that XML stuff to define a schema and a structure and push that content into and bind from that XML into into the control. I've found that quite buggy, and it's marked as being depreciated in the current Office 2010 implementation. So, I don't trust it. It works in some cases, but I've not had it consistently work. It doesn't always update those fields for you. But to add a new control, you've got a bunch of different types of control that you can add. You can add standard text box blocks. You can add some rich text boxes where you can have formatting and styles and so on. And a bunch of others. You can add picture controls and calendar controls and checkboxes and so on. And you can build up some quite sophisticated Word pages from these. So what we've done is we have created us see, I'm a dev. I always log in as administrator. Okay, so we've created a pretty straightforward template here. We've used an out-of-the-box title field. And if I have a look at that and look at the properties, so I've clicked on title, and I've gone to my developer ribbon group and clicked on properties, you can see that that's how I've called it title. And similarly, further down, I've got summary, and I've given that a title and a tag, keywords and categories. And it's those names that are going to allow me to find those in my code later. Those names are really important for being able to bind to that properly. So, very standard template document. So how do you actually use the Open XML SDK? It comes as a redistributable MSI, which basically installs a few DLLs onto the GAC. And the ones that are important to us are mainly around document format .openxml. When you're using it in your code, you also need to make sure you add Windows base. You'll get a compiler error if you don't. Some of the formats, some of the classes in document format will require Windows base. So this is not going to work in an online scenario because you need to install custom code in the GAC. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, for the current article in our processing, we're going to get the template document. We're going to open that document as a memory stream. We're going to iterate through the content controls within that document, and we're going to set the text based on the current article's columns. Now, we're not going to do this every time someone wants to download. So we're going to have this run once when it's edited and move on. Though I suppose I could have left it so it was on every page load, and then that would have been a good thing for.
Great performance.
Absolutely. Well, we've got to give you something to talk about in the next session.
I thought that's a printer-friendly.
No, well. So let's see how to do that. So what we're going to do is just walk through a little bit of code. Not that code, fortunately. Yeah, I know some of you are disappointed by that. So I'm doing this in an event receiver on my content type. So if I just open the Solution Explorer, I've got an event receiver here, publish article event receiver. which is going to fire off whenever items of that content type changes. And I'll come on to in the slides about why this is not a good place to do this. So I've got a method here called create Word document, and if I just go to that interesting. Yeah, if I just go to that definition, and we'll walk through that. So I'm passing in the properties from the event properties from the event receiver, and I'm doing this on update. So whenever the item's updated, if the status flag is set to final, I'm going to go and generate this document. So I'm getting the list, and I'm creating a new empty memory stream. And then what I'm doing is I'm streaming in a byte array of that document directly from SharePoint. So I'm just using splistitem.file.openBinary and sticking that in a byte array and then loading that into my memory stream. So I'm just doing a write of that byte array into my memory stream. So now in memory, I have a copy of that document. It's important if you're doing any code which uses this from the file system, that if you open this just as a file stream and start manipulating it with the word processing document namespace later on, when you dispose of that object, it will automatically save back to disk. So now in this case, we're dealing with memory streams, and that's less important, but it's definitely a gotcha if you're doing this client side. So what we're doing now is we're using our word processing document names class, and we're getting what's called the main document part, and that's really the body of your document. There are other bits to the document. There's the headers and the footers, and there's some custom properties, and there's a bunch of other stuff. But for what we're doing here, we're just getting the main document part. Oh, and we're also getting, in this case, the core file properties part, because I want to set the title of the document so that gets reflected properly. So the first thing I'm doing is setting that title. So here I'm just getting the title from my list item, and I'm just setting that package property .title to title. And then I'm iterating through in my main document part document.descendants. So I'm just finding all the, see what I mean about it being slightly obscure? That's great. STT, you need to be careful about how you say that. STT block, that's the class that gets used for those content controls. So I'm getting descendants of the document that have that, and then I'm making sure that the alias is not null, and then I'm basically doing some stuff depending on which one it is. So for content, I'm processing some rich text. I'm not going to go through that code. All that does is it iterates through, because that's got paragraph tags and a bunch of other stuff. I need to process that in a way to create new paragraphs in my document, and also bold text and italics and stuff. There isn't really any documented way of, well, there's no third-party tools out there that I'm aware of that does that for you. You have to hand crank that out, and it's great fun reading HTML and converting that into something else. Yeah, it's a partner opportunity, I guess. The other ones are really are more simple. Summary and keywords, they're just text fields in SharePoint, so I can just do a toString and throw that into my text object. And categories is an MMS field, as we saw a couple of sessions ago. So I'm getting that taxonomy field, and I'm using the taxonomy field value control because this is a single valued taxonomic field. In order to make this, work with multi-valued, you'd have to use a slightly different process for doing this. But effectively, I'm then just getting the label from that taxonomy field and pushing that into my text field. And that's pretty much it. I now have in memory the document as I want it to be. I've processed the article information and I'm pushing that in. So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the memory stream. I'm going to find my file name, which I've got a mask for here. I'm just going to call it article underscore the ID of the document in the list, so I can find it easily later. And then I'm just getting that file from my SharePoint site, and I'm updating. I'm adding that file and then updating and saving that file back to SharePoint. So if I just browse to my articles list, actually let's do this one. So I've just set the article to final. And if I go to my libraries, you can see that Shared Documents now has 2 documents in it. And one of them is Article 1. And if I open that in read-only mode, you can see that I've had my title has been set from that value. That's bad content, the P's. You can see that actually in the interface as well. And then the main content block, I've properly got my different paragraphs. And then towards the bottom, I've got my keywords and my categories have been pushed into this document automatically. Okay. So pretty straightforward. There's a few things you need to worry about when you're developing with OpenXML. You've got to be very careful with non-text content controls. As we saw, rich text particularly, you're going to have to do some work to make that full fidelity with your online version. And obviously pictures are also problematic because they actually have to be embedded in the document, in the stream as a block of XML. And in fact, if I go back to my original big document here and find that, it was towards the bottom. So this is that logo of the SharePoint conference. So it's just streaming that in as binary data. So you do have to do some interesting manipulation there. And on the other side, you need to be careful with SP fields where you can't just call toString. So you need to be quite aware of what type of column you're trying to replicate into your Word thing. So obviously MMS, you need different code to look up to choice and so on, pretty much every type of content. And if you've got any custom fields, you need to be aware of how to get the value that you want to render into your document. So we've got our Word document. That's sitting in our document library. But we want to go a step further and provide a fixed format of PDF. So we can use Word automation services when we're in an on-prem environment in order to do this. It's a service application that's installed and configurable out of the box. And pretty much what it does is it provides the ability to do conversions, and I'll get on to what I mean by that, server-side on documents without needing to install the client tools themselves on the server. So you don't need to install, well, you're not allowed to, it breaks a licensing agreement. You don't need to install Word in order to start manipulating Word documents. It'll open any document that Word can open, so RTFs and Word XML and early versions of Word, and it can save those documents in other areas. So some scenarios that you might want to use it for are in the next slide, I think, yeah. So you can use it to update document fields automatically. So a lot of times people will upload a document without having clicked the Update All Fields option. So this makes sure that your documents are always up to date. And particularly common is the need to update tables of content. So you can ensure that those are kept up to date regularly. You might also want to use it to merge different documents together into using merge content capabilities. You can also use it to convert formats. So you can say, I've got 100,000 Word 2003 documents in my corpus. I just need to get those all up to 2010. And I just want to run something that will automatically do that for me. Word Automation Services gives you that capability to convert earlier versions or non-standard Word versions into Word 2010. And you can also, and this is what we're going to use it for, provide the ability to push from Word into PDF. So looking a bit about at the architecture, effectively what's going on is you've got the object model which runs on your web server, and that uses the Microsoft.Office.Server.Word namespace because Microsoft want to be consistent about their namespace stuff. And when you do that, that's going to push some data down into your queue manager, because this does not happen synchronously. When you want to do a conversion, you don't want that running on your web server. It can be a pretty resource-intensive operation. And you want to manage in some way how many are being done at any given time. So the app server has this queue manager and scheduler process, and effectively that stores that in the database that you set up when you created the Word Automation Services service application in your farm setup. And that database is where all those queues of documents are stored. So it doesn't store any of the documents themselves, it just stores some references to say, I've got some stuff I need to do, and next time it's going to run and do those. So what happens is we have a timer job that runs out of the box every 5 minutes or 15 minutes, one of those. I'm doubting myself now. We've got a timer job that runs regularly. See what I did there? I'll read up the slides anyway. Yeah, so that basically has a look at that document queue, grabs any conversion jobs that need to be run, and then runs that through the Word file conversion service. That then pushes content into the content database. Excuse me. So, out-of-the-box implementations. Out of the box, when you install the product, you'd like to think there'd be some workflow activities or some implementation out of the box that's going to help you out here. But sorry, no. All the APIs are there, the infrastructure's there, but if you want to actually make use of the Word Automation Services stuff, you need to write some code and configure it. There are some third parties that do have custom workflow activities that mean you don't actually have to write code, but you need to install something. So it's a pretty straightforward job to create a conversion job. You create a new conversion job object. You provide some settings for that. You put the files that you want to convert into that job, and that's quite important. You can put 10,000 Word documents into a single job, and that will run. There's some best practice about some limits, but typically, if you have a large number to process, you want to batch those up so that you're not having a different conversion job for every single file. And then you submit that to the document queue, and that goes and sits in that database until the time a job runs next. So let's have a look at how this works. So also here, I have a create conversion job. And here I'm getting the Word Service Application Proxy object, and I need to get that in order to pass that into my new conversion job method. And in order to do that, I'm just passing in a string value and then getting, unfortunately, there's no way of actually getting that proxy object directly. You actually have to iterate through all your proxies, and if it's of the right type, we're going to make use of that. Clearly allergic to Word Automation. Either that or PowerPoint.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. So apart from that, it's pretty straightforward. As I said, you create the job, you add in some properties. The user token is the context under which the job will run. So that's important for when it needs to write back to SharePoint. It will write back as that user. Whether or not to update the fields, so that's automatically going through and updating your table of contents and all those fields from the metadata. And the output format is whether or not you want to save in PDF or any of the other formats that it supports. So pretty much anything that you see here. So documents in old versions, MHTML, yeah, a bunch of stuff. And then you add that to the job, and you start the job. Bad naming conventions here. Start doesn't mean start, doesn't run. All that's done is it's put it in the queue. The timer job then has to run in order to build that. So let's go and have a look at that document that we just created. In fact, I'll do that from the browser. So there's our Word document. And I just created a web part to add some icons to the file. And here's the PDF. Now, if I click that, because I haven't got great error handling in here, that's going to fail. Because in my libraries, I still, while I've been talking, it's actually run. Right, so there's my new article, and I can open that. Well, I can save that as a PDF. There we go. I can open it as a PDF. So here's my PDF file in Foxit with all that same data. So what that's done is it's taken my Word document, run it through the Word Automation Services queue, and generated this document. Now, if you're developing, you might find that you upload your code, you do some work, you trigger off the code that's going to add your document to the queue, and then, I guess you could go for lunch or have a coffee or something. You're probably going to want some instant gratification there. So you just run the timer job, and that'll be called by whatever name your service application is called. Or you can go through Central Admin and just click Run Now on that timer job. So here I'm just getting the timer job with that name and piping it to start SP timer job. You will use this all the time when you're developing. Definitely allergic to something. Yeah. So pretty straightforward code. Create the job, change some settings, add the file, and kick the job off. So PowerShell, I find I use all the time if I'm doing custom development in Word Automation. I showed you start SP timer job, but unless you've actually saved the conversion job ID somewhere, you won't be able to necessarily find that job again, unless you use the conversion job status.get all jobs. In a dev scenario, you can just spin up some PowerShell and get all the jobs, and you'll find out which ones are waiting, which ones are paused. But in the real world, you're going to want to be logging what the conversion job ID is in whatever logging scenario you've got. Because in a debug situation where you're trying to work out what's going on a production farm, that's going to be really hard to do looking through the ULS logs or whatever your logging infrastructure is, unless you know what that conversion job ID is. So definitely make sure you do that. And then, dealing with failure. There are 6 different states that the conversion job has. It could be cancelled, which means it never ran. Count's just a property on that. That shouldn't be in there. Failed means something went wrong, and that will be reported in the ULS of the application server that it ran on. In progress means that it's churning away, and if you're adding large sets of files to your job, that could take some time. Not started, you've just added it to the queue. The timer job hasn't picked it up yet. And succeeded means you're all good. So being able to monitor that status is really important when you're relying on this, because typically the use cases for Word Automation are often compliance-driven. We want to convert stuff to PDF so people can't change them. We're not absolutely convinced that this records management stuff is going to really lock that file down. It will, but people still like PDFs because they're immutable, in theory. $15. I use one of them. So the implications for using it, by default, it's 15 minutes. It depends on your usage scenario as to whether or not that's frequent enough or too frequent or whatever. If you have a large number of conversions that you're running all the time and it needs to be pretty much on demand, you might want to reduce that down no shorter than 5 minutes. If, on the other hand, this is part of some process that you want to happen once a week, you might want to consider running it less frequently. You also need to work out what the impact of this is all on your application servers. So if you've got really high usage, you definitely want to think about moving this service application to its own server or dedicated servers. Because it's a service app, we can move it to its dedicated set of servers, and it'll all just carry on working. And anyway, that's an IT pro problem. And think about, when you are thinking about performance, think about what you're actually using it for. Different use cases will have different impacts. So if you're just updating fields, that can be pretty quick. If you're doing conversions to PDF, that's very resource intensive. And so you need to understand that how you use how you use word automation services is going to have a very dramatic impact on how the system performs. So when you're going through your process for monitoring performance, you need to make sure that you've got some process in place which understands that this is a process that can be triggered by end user behavior. So you need to understand how people are adopting your solution and what the impact of that adoption is likely to be on your long-term performance. A lot of the IT Pro track content will deal with how you monitor that performance and so on. So that's okay. That's pretty much my session. And
hello, this is Rob. Yep.
Really?
Yeah. Thanks for the golf game. Yeah, thanks for calling me back. The golf game was great. I was really surprised. First time to play St. Andrews, and
It's our CIO.
Never
He never comes
heard
down
of
here.
anybody scoring a perfect score. But I know, as my sales guy, you would not lie to me when you went to the hole after my first hit and found my ball there every time. Amazing, absolutely amazing. So I'll tell you what. Can you send the statement of work over, and we are going to be ready to sign that and go ahead and move ahead with with this solution. So thanks a lot, and I look forward to seeing that, and I'll sign it as soon as I get it. Okay, thanks. Okay, where's my minion?
Right here, sir.
Oh gosh, stop sneaking up on me, okay?
Sorry.
Yeah. So minion, what's your name?
It's Matt, sir. We've worked together for like 8.5 years.
Okay. So Bill, what I want you to do is we've got a dev team working on a solution right now. We've just inked a deal, getting ready to ink a deal with the vendor that we've been discussing with. What I want you to do is I want you to go to the dev team, and I want you to tell them that everything they've been working on, we're pushing to the cloud. Can you do that for me?
Pushing to the cloud?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
He doesn't realise I'm right here.
Yeah.
Just bear with me one moment, sir.
Yeah.
Hi, Ben.
Hi,
I've
Matt.
just been talking with Mr. Foster, and he says basically we need to move to the cloud. It shouldn't be a problem, so I take it you and the guys are going to be cool with that?
What? When?
Like, tomorrow.
Are
Today,
we,
if you could do it.
are we cool with this?
I'm out.
Are we cool with this?
Party tonight. No. Can't do it.
Well, none of this will work.
No, none of this will work.
Okay. No, not for 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah,
You want me to go back to Mr. Foster and say 6 months?
yeah, absolutely. We'll be fine to do it. We're just too busy right now. We've got too much else going on.
Okay. And obviously there's the party tonight that everyone's focused on.
Yeah.
Fair
and,
enough.
you know,
That's understandable. It's understandable.
yeah, and you know, we'd need to work all night. We'd miss the party. Nah.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Foster. Sorry, sir.
Stop sneaking up on me, Joe.
Matt, sir.
Oh, Matt, yes.
8 years.
Of course,
Yeah.
8 years, yes, yes.
So I've just spoken to dev guys, and they say basically it's not going to be a problem. Get it done by tomorrow. Happy days.
Are they started?
They're halfway there already.
All right, let's get moving. I've got to go.
Cool. Thanks.
I need you in on time tomorrow.
At least we got rid of the IT pros.
Yeah. So thanks a lot. Any questions? Where's?
What considerations do you need to put around permissions and information rights management, so IRM capabilities for Word docs and that sort of stuff?
With the conversion stuff? So the question was, how does IRM even, IRS, different thing. How does IRM play with doc conversions and so on? Badly, I think, is the general feel. I mean, you can set up policy so when it ends up in your SharePoint library, it will apply policy to it at that point. But within the automation code itself, and certainly within the Open XML code, you can't really deal with that kind of stuff. It's only when it hits the SharePoint document library that then a policy will be applied to actually mark that in a certain way for IRM.
Then, what if you need to copy metadata from the source to the destination document after conversion?
So what you'd then have, so the question was, what if you need to copy some of the metadata from your source item? Thank you. I actually had...
Ask me.
So you should watch my session in SPC last year because I actually covered that.
I was drinking.
Okay. So the question was, what happens if you want to move metadata from your source list item to your converted document? So in this case, the source list item is the document that you're converting from your document library into PDF. So for that, what you have to do is set up either a timer job or some other regular process to go and find all the articles, all the PDFs that have been created based on that conversion job ID that you've kept somewhere safe. And then that conversion job ID has enough implicit knowledge to be able to go and get the source document and be able to then apply that metadata through custom code. There's a lot of moving parts, and there's pros and cons to different ways of doing that. I mean, you could, if you're doing it in a workflow activity, you might have a delay while it just checks that whether that conversion job is done, and when it's done, it's still got the context of the workflow it's running in, so you've got a lot more. You don't have to go and find that document again because it's already running in a workflow. But obviously that has implications as well because then you've got long-running workflows. So yeah, there's pros and cons.
So if you're merging your updated form fields and doing the conversion, it's two different jobs. So you can update the fields and do the conversion in one step.
No, yeah, I mean you'd have to. There would have to be 2 blocks of code, but they can run. One by one.
Update the fields and then have it converted with the fields updated. Is that?
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah,
One step,
one step.
2 substeps.
Wait a
Yeah.
minute, wait a minute. Todd just said something. Put an event receiver on the destination job. On the destination document. You know what the problem is? It never fires.
Yeah, it never fires because Word Automation Services. Although I had that pretty picture where it said it's putting that. Actually, no, it was pretty accurate. Let me just go back to it. Yeah, so that's pushing that document into the content DB. It's not using the OM. It's just going straight in. They're allowed to do that. They're Microsoft. So that event receiver will never fire. So yeah, that's something else you need to be aware of.
Hey Ben,
Yeah.
as optimization, since you have that PDF icon up on the article, once the conversion is run, could you just update the article from the timer job to have it linked to it so that subsequent clicks would pop?
Yeah, or you'd put some logic which made sure that the PDF was actually there before it displayed the icon, or or you'd have a custom column on that list item which you then updated to say we have a PDF version and we have a Word document.
From that timer job, you have access. You basically have access to the locations. There's nothing.
From the conversion job.
Yeah, exactly. Taken?
Yes, you do. Yeah, you do. Yeah.
If I didn't misunderstand, you were saying the actual conversion code, the logic that converts the list item to Word and then the PDF, you have it in item updated, and you said something like that's not the best place to put it in.
Yeah, I thought I had a slide on that, but I may not have. I can talk about that anyway. Yeah, I may have been coughing during that slide. So yeah. No, I mean there's two places. There's two other places you could do it. You could do it, and this you could either write a timer job, which monitors that a location for articles with a status, and then kicks off the process to add those files to the job, and that would actually be reasonably efficient because there you could set that timer job to go off, once an hour or once a day or something like that, and that would get all of the documents that needed to be generated in one block and added to a single conversion job, and that's going to be slightly more efficient overall because it just iterates through on that job. The alternative is on a workflow. You could automatically or manually kick off a workflow to create a PDF. And I've used that in a number of records management scenarios where what you need to do is mark that document with as a finalized version, and then generate a certificate of destruction when it gets to the end of life. So thinking through not just at the start of its life how it gets created and then moved into a records repository, but then what happens when you want to dispose of that. In many jurisdictions, you need to generate certificates of destruction. And so, as a part of the workflow that deletes the source document, you generate a Word document that's a certificate of destruction, and then you convert that into a PDF. Any other? Yeah. So the question was, why won't Open XML work in 365? There's two. The main reason that, neither of these will work. So Word automation services won't work because that service application is not available in the Office 365 environment. Open XML, you can write sandbox solutions that run and work using Open XML. In fact, the early part of my demo prep for this was still with the sandbox version of the code, and it just works. Where you have a problem with 365 specifically is you're not allowed to deploy that DLL to the server, and it needs to be in the server, so you can't use it. So your code can't run. Yeah, but it only works in the sandbox because it's able to reference that DLL. If that DLL doesn't exist on the server, which it won't, you have no way of getting that DLL up to that server.
The
No.
solution validator will block it.
No, it won't.
It won't let you deploy it in Office 365. That DLL will not come.
Because otherwise the sandbox would be pretty useless. You just put everything in a separate DLL and upload that with the package. You know, it won't let you install GAC level, you know, farm level DLLs. Yep, and it won't deploy. Yep, but it won't work in 365.
Any multi-language capabilities that the Word automation brings? So could you convert one document to many documents, or is it always a one-to-one output?
It's always a one-to-one output. So is there any multilingual scenarios that you could bring to bear? Yeah, I mean, effectively what you'd end up using it for is you could use it as part of a workflow to generate final versions of documents, but you'd have other steps in your workflow that would manage the creation of those other language versions. Yeah. So we're slightly over time, so thank you very much. I'll be around here for the rest of the day, so if you've got any further questions, come and find me. Thank you.